Trial Lawyers University, where the Titans come to train. Produced and powered by LawPods.
Well, Bobby Taghavi is joining us today, and Bobby is the lesser-known boss at Sweet James. Is that a good way to describe it?
I would say so. Probably the lesser known, the man behind the man, the guy behind the scenes,
Right.
the not as handsome one.
I don't know. I mean, I think it looked like a good Middle Eastern James. So sweet. in case things go awry, we got Sweet Bobby.
All right, I'll take it.
All right. So Sweet Bobby, how did you? Before we talk about how you got to Sweet James, let me ask you, how did you get to? I always like to, understand how people got the motivation, inspiration to do this thing we call becoming a lawyer.
For me, it started in high school. So I moved here from Iran when I was about 14 years old. Didn't speak English at all. Didn't know the alphabet. Took a little class before ninth grade, and then jumped into regular school. And the first book they gave me was To Kill a Mockingbird, and I was fascinated by Atticus Finch and the whole legal system and that whole ordeal. And then in high school, I had a friend who had was a victim of DUI accident and went to court to support the family, and saw this female trial lawyer prosecutor standing there doing her thing, and I was like, I want to be like her. So kind of started there. I had an uncle who was a lawyer here, so wanted to kind of follow in his footsteps too, and wasn't smart enough to be a doctor, so here I am.
Yeah, my dad wanted me to be a doctor too, but once I took a chemistry class, it just wasn't for me. The smell of that stuff got me nauseous. I couldn't imagine working in a hospital.
Yeah, I couldn't either. I left it to my brother. He's a smarter one, so he became a doctor.
Yeah, I didn't even have anybody that smart in my family, so I was the last chance my dad had for a doctor. He got 4 lawyers instead. 4 lawyers instead.
Though. 4 lawyers?
Yeah, I was the youngest, so
yeah.
That's like the 5th lawyer in my family. It helped a little bit having family in the law, people
Yeah.
you know what I mean? Especially when you're doing like a lot of the statutory stuff like criminal, family, bankruptcy, that kind of stuff. It's helpful.
It gives you a baseline. That's kind of how it was with my uncle and I. Just coming out, at least I kind of knew the lay of the land a little bit.
Where'd you go to law school?
I went to University of San Diego School of Law.
Oh, nice.
Yeah, the Harvard of San Diego. So.
Nice. And did you take any like trial ad classes and stuff like that, or moot court, mock trial?
I did. I took moot court that first year. Like they made you take moot court, and I was horrible at it. I think one of the judges yelled at me because they asked me, the famous case JL v. Florida. I don't know if you still remember. It was some search and seizure case, and the mock trial judge or the moot court judge was like, well, Mr. Taghavi, why would we care about JL v. Florida? It's a Florida case. And I made some snark ass comment that it was actually a U.S. Supreme Court case and it's binding on them. And they thought that my tone with the judges was not very professional and respectful. So hated moot court, never did that again. Did a little bit of mock trial, but not a whole lot.
How do you think growing up, in Iran during the revolution, affected you and your pursuit of being a trial lawyer?
In a few ways, that's actually a really good question, Dan. I don't get that a lot. Most people talk about law school and how did law school change, make you want to be a lawyer or make you want to be a trial lawyer. But, really growing up in Iran and growing up during the revolution, you understand how people as a whole become powerless against the system, right? You wake up one day and then you literally have no power. You have no rights. You have no power to if a public entity hurts you, you're kind of stuck. Like you can't sue the government because their bus ran you over or ran your family member over. And it really then put things in perspective as I came to a country that you have those rights and you can, as an individual, use the justice system to gain justice, right? That just wasn't something that was even feasible in Iran. So it really put life in perspective of how important it is for us to use our justice system. And granted, it has its flaws. compared to other places, like you don't even have it. So
Right, and it really puts what's happening today in Washington in some perspective too, with,
yeah.
attacking law firms, attacking everything, the universities. It's craziness, but I mean, it's like seems like it would almost parallel that in some way.
Yeah, it's one of those where until you don't have it, you don't realize how important it is, and it's easy for you to bag on it. So and I have a lot of friends who feel strongly about the justice system sucks, and to a certain extent, again, it has its flaws, but until you don't have it, and until you can't use it yourself when you need it, you realize how important it is and how good we have it.
Yeah, and you were used to be a part of a different type of justice system in the criminal justice system as I was so you know tell us about because you did you get started at the prosecutor's office?
I started out at a business lit firm. Left that very shortly after. I wanted to be a trial lawyer, so I figured the best way to be a trial lawyer was to either be a prosecutor or a public defender. So I applied to both, and I didn't really care which one I got. I just wanted to be in court. I wasn't one of those like true believers. I have to do one or the other. I really didn't care. I wanted to go to trial on the government's dime. And the DA's office offered me the job first. It was the same salary, same benefits, same everything. And so I took the bird in hand and I joined the Orange County DA's office somewhere late 2006, early 2007. I think I got sworn in. Yeah. And I just, it's one of the very few people that then does the jump over. So,
I know. So tell us about your tenure there and what you learned and what you loved about it, and what you didn't like about it.
yeah, I had an amazing time being a prosecutor. I was lucky enough that I got to both try a lot of cases. I tried, somewhere in the ballpark of close to 90 cases to trial, but I made a lot of good friends both in the defense bar and the plaintiff's bar. Some of those have now moved on and came and joined me at the or at Sweet James. A lot of them are on the bench now. But it was a cool place to kind of learn the law and cut your teeth with, public defenders and defense attorneys, whether they were super experienced or brand new like you, learning from the judges, learning the etiquette in a courtroom, learning the evidence code, a lot of which translates to PI. So it was really cool. It was a good place to be in, and to, in PI you have to deal with clients, right? And in the DA's office, and in the criminal sector, it's even more person centric, right? In PI you have a lot of medical doctors and experts you deal with just as much as you deal with normal people. Whereas in the criminal sector, as you know, Dan, most of it is dealing with just normal people, percipient witnesses, informants to, like, victims, co-defendants. And so you learn to deal with humans when they're under a lot of stress, right? They're either victimized or they're looking at jail time. And it really shaped me as an attorney, as a trial attorney, and as a human being, as a person, learning that sometimes, you don't throw the book at somebody, and you have to show deference in the face of mitigation, right? And sometimes the opposite, right? Sometimes you realize that, you have to go to the max because that person deserved it. I did, like anyone else, you start with misdemeanors, and you do bar fights and domestic violence and DUIs. And I was fortunate enough to be able to do a lot of big cases, and I worked in the sexual assault unit. I did, I don't know, some 40 odd cases of people that went to prison for life on jury trials. Some of the more high profile cases, I had a couple international cases, a lot of national cases. I worked in an FBI Homeland Security task force for a while, dealing with, child human trafficking and all sorts of horrible stuff. I worked the serial killer Golden State Task Force case. So that was a career highlight of, one of the most prolific serial killers in the history of the United States. And he had done a lot of sexual assaults and murders. So my expertise in that realm kind of came into play. But So that was it. But the best part was just getting in court, right? Just doing trial after trial, having my buddies take my verdicts while I'm picking another jury. It was great times, and it really shaped me as like I said, not just as a lawyer, but as a human.
A lot of camaraderie back there in that
Oh,
prosecutor's
I
office.
mean, we have, with the defense attorneys too. I was telling somebody this funny story where I was in trial with this public defender, and his car broke down during the trial, and he lived close to me. So every morning I would drive up to his house, pick him up. We would just talk about fantasy football or whatever it was all the way. I'll drop him off at the PD's office. I'd go get my stuff ready, would go in court, fight all day in trial in front of the jury. Then once the jurors left, I'd be like, all right, I'll pick you up at, 6:15ish, and we'll go grab pizza and go home, and we would do that. And, you know, it was camaraderie within the criminal bar, and kind of like the PI, kind of like the plaintiff's bar. The criminal bar as a whole is actually in Orange County is very close to each other, both defense, private, public defenders, and DAs. And so, yeah, it was a lot of camaraderie all around, and I got to learn from a lot of really good, experienced defense attorneys on how to be a lawyer.
Wow. I didn't have that camaraderie growing up and doing the criminal stuff in Michigan because I was always like a lone, worked by myself, lone,
Yeah,
solo practitioner for the most part, and I didn't really get along with the prosecutors that well because where I came from, I thought they were kind of unfair and dishonest, which is crazy, like a dishonest prosecutor, because that's nothing. That's a pretty dangerous thing.
it's extremely dangerous, and I've seen it not just when I was there, but afterwards. And there's nothing more dangerous than a prosecutor that's not willing to do the right thing.
Yeah. So but you're no longer with the prosecutor's office, obviously. So
Indeed.
tell us how it is that you managed to. Not many people get out after 13 years. Pretty much after that much time, we got to write that person off as a lifer. You managed to not follow that path. So how did you get out?
So, at some point there was an election and there was a new elected official that came on, and I was in I wasn't really in a trial unit anymore, but once I finished with the Golden State Killer stuff, I was in a non-trial unit doing special projects for the elected and for the executive management, whether it was officer involved shooting, reviews, stuff like that. And I want to get back in trials, and it was one of those things where, well, you got to still do this for a little while. And part of it was I needed to try something different. I'd done, you know, sex crimes and murders are like the kind of within the county prosecutor's office is the pinnacle of what you do. So then the next step is be a manager until you run for judge, or run for judge maybe in a couple of years while you're not a manager. And that's kind of it. So some of my friends start slowly running for judge, and I was like, I'm way too young to not want to try cases and be in the courtroom. So I decided to, kind of walk away. And I don't know if you've ever seen Steve Jobs' commencement address to Stanford. And there's this part in it, and I remember watching it with my dad. It was like a CNN thing on Steve Jobs, and he said, every morning I woke up and I looked in the mirror and I realized I didn't like what I was doing. And after the fifth or sixth time, I decided to make a big change in my life. And that's when he left and went to Pixar and all that stuff. And it just kind of hit home for me. And that was like on a Friday, and then Saturday and Sunday, I kept thinking about it. And Monday morning, I sent a letter to the elected official giving him my 2 weeks. So
For freedom, but you didn't start off immediately at Sweet James. You had a little bit of a detour.
I did. I left like the last day of September in 2019. The next morning I woke up and I had my own law firm, literally the next morning. And a few days later, I had a friend message me saying he has a PI trial and he's never done a trial. And so I jumped in, or he had done trials, but he couldn't do this one. So I jumped in and helped him with that one. It was a premise liability case. Right after that, I got a criminal defense case that was set up for trials. I tried that case. So I did 2 trials in like a matter of a month and a half, maybe not even a month. And then what happened was, word had kind of got out that this I was gone, and I had, I was on the union board there. I knew a lot of people. So I started getting a lot of calls from police unions and police departments when their officers got in trouble, right? Whether it was a DUI, whether they needed a, visa for their, significant other, whatever it was. So I almost became this kind of semi general counsel for a bunch of these random police departments where, hey, our officer has a contract dispute with somebody, and I'll, take the call, either find somebody and refer it out that I trusted or handle it myself. So I started doing that for a little while, and then that was for like another 2-3 months until my partner Steve and I started talking about his new partnership with James.
Before we get to though, we all want to know, how did your first civil jury trial go? What was the verdict?
My first civil jury trial was a premise liability case against the two construction companies, the contractor and the subcontractor. And this lady had fallen based on whatever they had, whatever construction they had done. And it was less than a 1-inch rise in the flooring. And it was a car dealership. And the owner of the car company had not been, the car dealership had not been sued because of the workers' comp stuff. She was an employee, and I didn't know any better. I had no idea. I didn't realize the concept of it. So, I get, all I'm thinking is liability, and I don't care who liability sits with as long as it's not with my client. So I get the owner of the dealership on, and I just fillet him on the stand. I mean, it is just a bloodbath. And, with the contractor and general contractor, there wasn't a whole lot to hit on. I hit him, but not that much. Not realizing that you can have a non-party on a verdict form, right? And so what happens is at the end, the defense argued to put the car dealership on the verdict form because I painted him so bad. The judge agreed, and the jury found almost entire liability on the car dealer. So that was a big goose egg as my first premise liability case, but I learned a lot.
That's kind of the idea. Either we win or we learn.
Yeah.
And how about your first criminal case? Criminal defense case.
First criminal defense case was
And only criminal defense case.
my only criminal defense trial was shortly after. It was a domestic violence case. It was a really messy case, misdemeanor, so not the injuries weren't significant, but the case had a lot of issues. So I kind of did what you and I were talking about one day. I went and told the prosecutor, "Hey, young buck, you really shouldn't be trying this case." And I think with him at the time, I had just left. It was kind of a big deal. I was, not to pat myself on the back, but I was a heavy hitter there. So, he saw it as an opportunity to beat somebody, and I told him that he should not be trying the case, and end up it hung 11-1 for not guilty, and the judge dismissed the case, saying, "I cannot find a reasonable jury would ever find him guilty beyond reasonable doubt." So that was
sort of we'll go with a win. It was a procedural win. But like when I lived in Michigan, like all they did was criminal cases against the same prosecutor's office, and I was like, at the end of my career, I was about 98-2, and the two that I lost were like DUIs with crazy BACs that were,
yeah.
I was getting paid to go try the case, so to make a living too. You know what I mean? I mean, righteous and all, but I felt like sometimes some of the prosecutors would take these bullshit cases where I'm like, okay, this is a bullshit case. You realize that you're going to get your ass kicked, but just because like they had nothing to lose. If they lost,
Yeah.
nobody's expected to win. If they win, they got their big, crown or whatever the hell they were looking for, instead of just thinking about what's the right thing to do.
So yeah, no, I agree. I was lucky enough that most of the time my supervisors in the DA's office, almost always, I never had an issue where they were like, "You have to go try this case." They were like, "Just do the right thing." And for me, it never, I always want to sleep good at night. I never wanted to even mess around with the thought of putting someone away not even that they didn't do it, someone that I could improve beyond a reasonable doubt, right? And there's a big distinction there. It's not just, "Hey, I don't think the guy did it." There's times that you're like, "I'm pretty sure he did it, but I don't think I can prove it." And those are the gut check ones that you would have to be able to walk away from, right? Understanding the gravity of your pen when you file charges against somebody. But I did lose my first criminal trial too, so that's kind of my shtick, right? I lose the first one.
Oh, when you were a prosecutor?
My first day on the job, Dan. First day on the job, I go in at 9 and I get a call saying, "Hey, new guy, there's a driving on a suspended license for a DUI upstairs. Jurors ready. Here's a file. Go pick a jury." And I'm like, I don't even know what that means. What do you mean pick a jury? And they're like, "Oh yeah, and you have to do motions in limine." And I go upstairs, and it's a judge who's now passed away. His name was Judge Ed Laird. They called him Fast Eddie because he'd pick a jury, and by the time you knew what happened, you're doing closing arguments. So sure enough, I go in, no idea what's going on. I pick a jury, call a cop, have 4 defense witnesses that complete gut my case, and by 3 p.m., the jurors find the guy not guilty. Same day. And get
That
in
is
my
fast.
car driving home, and my dad calls me, "Hey, how's your first day as a prosecutor?" Bless you. And I say, "Well, Dad, I it was good, but I picked the jury and I did a closing argument and they found the guy not guilty." And he kind of pauses on the other line and goes, "Son, like, I've been to jury service. It takes days to do those things. Like, are you sure you did a jury trial?" I'm like, it was a full-blown jury trial. There was 12 of them. They found the guy not guilty. They walked out. And he pauses again and he goes, "Well, in the movies they say you have 100% perfect conviction rate. Never have to worry about that again. That monkey's off your back." I was like, "Thanks, Dad.
You
Appreciate it."
see? That's a good reframe right there. It takes the pressure off you.
Yep.
When you're flawless, there's a lot of pressure on you.
Yeah.
The highlight of TLU for me was having the opportunity to network with attorneys from out of state.
TLU has been amazing. I'm so glad I came. It was one of the most inspiring events I've been to. Great networking, great food. It's been amazing. I can't wait for next year.
It's all right. So you get your experience in there, and then tell us how it is so you're on your own for how long before you get the call from your Steve?
I'm on my own probably from that October, November, December, probably January or February I started. So only 3-4 months. Steve Mayer and James Bergner had just started Sweet James officially January 1st of 2020. But they had started their partnership towards the end of the year in 2019, October or November. So right about the time I left the DA's office, they had just kind of started it, but they hadn't really kicked it off the ground. So sometime in like February or March, I get a call from Steve and we start talking. Then the pandemic happens, the shutdown happens. Again, when there's a small opening in July, we talk, and I'd known Steve for a very long time. So, we would be talking consistently, but not about work. In July, he says, "Hey, we're going to try to push through the pandemic with this thing." And I think at the time there was like 30 or 40 employees. So I started kind of coming to Sweet James' office, talking with him big picture about what it would look like. He wanted me to join and help him run the place. And officially, I think October 1st, I came over, but starting July or August, I was meeting with some of the lawyers here and kind of sitting in some meetings. But October 1st, 2020 was, I think, my first official day here at Sweet James.
So put in perspective, when you first start, there's, let's say, 30 to 40 people, and how many people work at Sweet James now?
Probably 400 and change. I think we have 60 some odd lawyers now. 60 lawyers.
It's the most astronomical growth I think anybody's witnessed in the legal industry in a long time.
Yeah.
But you said you know Steve for a long time. So tell us, how did you know Steve Mayer before joining Sweet James?
So Steve and I met when I was 14 and he was 18. I took an SAT course, and in that SAT course, I met his 2 sisters, one of whom's a lawyer, the other's a doctor. And, I just became friends with them. And that summer, they said, "Hey, our older brother's gonna go to Magic Mountain, which is a amusement park a little north of LA." He's like, "You want to go?" I'm like, "Sure." So I meet Steve and puts us in a car, takes us up to this amusement park. Him and his buddies go off to one side. I go off with the younger crew to the other side. And at some point around 5:36 p.m., we all meet up at this big bungee cord where they tie two people together and they take you up and they bungee you down. And Steve's like, and if you know Steve, Dan, he's a pretty intense guy, and he's like, "I'm gonna go on this thing. Who wants to go?" And there's, I don't know, 10 of us, and everyone's like, "I'm not going on that." Like they're looking, saying, "Hell no." And I kind of think to myself, this guy drove me up here, like he probably paid for me. I don't remember. I'm sure he paid for me to get in. I'm like, I can't let him go by himself. I'm like, "I'll go with you." And next thing you know, we're tied together next to each other, going up this, slowly taking us all the way up this bungee thing. And yeah, from then on, we became fast friends. And as time has gone on, we've traveled the world together, and we, he's a brother, a mentor, a friend, my business partner, a lot of, we're together more than we are probably with our families. So, and through later on through marriages, we actually became family. So yeah, so that's how I've known Steve for now going almost on 30 some odd years.
Nice. And so
Actually, 30 years almost exactly. This summer is going to be 30 years.
the so you're just 44?
Turning 44 this summer. Yeah.
Fuck, I'm turning 58 in September. I gotta get my ass moving. I'm a late bloomer, man. I didn't even move to California until I was 45. So,
Yeah.
but you know what? I'm gonna be focused and try to catch up with my younger friends. So what would you say the toughest challenge was from being a criminal defense? Because I'll be honest with you, from not doing litigation, not doing, real litigation, it's just, I think it's really hard for a lot of criminal practitioners to move from that world to the civil plaintiff's world. So what were some of the challenges?
I mean, part of it is understanding the lingo, the how, the connections. I mean, that's the first and foremost, right? Like, knowing the defense attorneys, the adjusters, like that in itself is a big challenge, right? Getting to know people. No one knows who the heck you are. Learning the lingo, understanding PI is more the big picture of it. I don't particularly feel like personal injury is a very complicated area of the law, right? If you keep it, if you're able to learn the medicine and just understand the big picture of the case, from a kind of a higher altitude, I think it's easy to navigate it. I think that the difficult part is dealing with the clients and understanding their needs, and truly being able to navigate them through what they're going through. Because as a criminal, as a prosecutor especially, you don't have to do that. You have victims, but you have victim advocates, and you see them for a little while, but then you're not really holding their hand through the process, right? In criminal defense, I had to do that a little bit more. Making sure they show up to their classes so they're not getting, a warrant on them, stuff like that. But even then, you're not the caregiver of the client the same way you are as in a personal injury setting. And I think that was the toughest part. All the other stuff like doing depots, going to court, even dealing with adjusters pre-litigation. It's with time it came. It wasn't difficult. I think the spirit of PI was more difficult for me, at least.
Mm-hmm. And so in this career you've had, what would you say are like, your highlights, the things that your most accomplishments you're most proud of?
I mean, to be honest, just this building Sweet James is probably my proudest accomplishment in my career. And a lot of that is, going through not just the pandemic and so much other stuff, but being able to bring in such talented lawyers and providing them an environment for them to flourish, right? I mean, that's, Steve and I always talk about we're in the talent acquisition business. And for me, and I'm sure we'll talk about my verdicts and my trials and all that, but I don't look at myself as someone whose legacy is going to be, oh, I made a bunch of money and hit all these verdicts. I mean, that's great and it's good and it's important. But if my legacy can be, hey, I have all these litigation and pre-litigation lawyers that I provided a good environment for, and for them to flourish and for them to achieve their dreams, both financially and in their career, that's a pretty good legacy to have, to walk away and say, you know what, that Bobby guy built a firm that allowed me to be a killer trial lawyer, or to be a killer pre-lit lawyer, or to be a killer professional, right? To be a killer CFO or CO or marketing person. That legacy, I think, lives on a lot more than verdicts and numbers in a lot of ways to me, right? And I get to some people that's more important, and rightfully so. But for me, I think that's, as I've built this firm with Steve and James, that's what I've realized is important to me.
Yeah, like, it's interesting you say that because, like, for me, of course, it's Trial Lawyers University, and it's really comes down to how many people's lives you get to really deeply impact for the better. And, that's what I consider like it's not actual hard currency, but it's a whole different, it's human currency that you get a whole bunch of, when you see those people's lives and how much better they are because you took some actions or did some things that impacted them.
I agree, and I think we have that in common, you and I. And I remember you telling me about a lawyer who on their first trial hit like 5 million, and they called you and said, in jury selection, man, I used all the stuff you taught me, and the jurors and I were just, they loved me and we were connected. And there's a certain fulfillment that I'm sure you got from that I feel when my lawyers hit big and they do great things, that it's hard until you have that type of reward to understand how valuable it is compared to you getting the verdict yourself, right? It's just a different type of reward, but it really is so rewarding that I can't, so that I can honestly say, you know, building this firm has been, you know, and it's been with a lot of people, right? Not just Steve and James. We have so many people that have put their lives and souls into this thing, and it's been such a collaborative effort. But I would say that's by far the highlight for me.
It's interesting too because I was at your holiday party over, last December, and I was, I was like only like I think only myself and Jen Gore, who's now one of your partners on your Atlanta operations, were the only two people there that I think weren't part of your firm. And Brian Panish, of course, we let him slide
Right.
in for the day, BP. But like out of all the firms I've ever visited, like no firm has ever felt more like a family operation than yours. And I was really impressed with that and how I talked to so many people there, not just the lawyers, but staff members who told me how much, the organization and Steve and you had actually changed their lives and given them opportunities to grow and to have responsibilities that were beyond their years, and how thrilled they were and grateful they were to be part of your organization. So I just wanted to, because it is great to build something great is not easy.
No, I appreciate that. And, I feel the same way every day, right? I wake up every morning and, I'm not just grateful that all these people are allowing me to do what I do, but, allowing me to lead them and allowing Steve to lead them. It's very special.
Yeah. But let's talk about, because you've only had, since you started at Sweet James, because I know you guys don't, really try the cases that you build for the most part. And so you've only had 3 jury trials in your 5 years there or so. But I just want to kind of talk about those trials a little bit. And, because I think it's very interesting how, people can have great success without, early on in their, even though you have a lot of experience as a trial lawyer, I think civil is quite a bit different. So let's kind of like your first jury trial after that premise this
Right.
one. So kind of let's just walk us through the making of Bobby Taghavi, the civil trial lawyer.
So, I don't have a caseload, obviously. I, so, jump in on a few cases with one of our partners, Ashkan Mohammadi, who's an excellent young trial lawyer. And when I first joined Sweet James, we didn't have a litigation department. I think Ashkan was the only person who had just come over. We started building our litigation department, and before that, a lot of the cases would be referred out. And now we have a very robust, talented litigation department of 20 some odd lawyers. I think we're close to 28 litigation lawyers just in California. So a lot of our cases are coming up for trial, and I think we're going to do a lot more trials coming up here as these cases mature and our trial dates are coming up. But the first trial was a wrongful death case that a lot of firms had rejected, and Ashkan had worked it up for a while, for like 4 years, I think, just through the different.
But hold on, when you say wrongful death, how'd the person die? Give us the story.
So the story was a young lady named Cassara Thomas. She was in her 30s, and she was severely disabled mentally. So she had a lot of mental disabilities, and she was living for a good 10 years in a home, a non-nursing facility, where people like her with autism and all sorts of mental diagnoses lived. She was taking a specific antidepressant, and unbeknownst to anyone, she had this genetic mutation where she couldn't digest metabolize this particular drug at a very fast pace. So as her dosing went up, she would have this buildup in her system, and there was this 3-day period where she couldn't get out of bed. She was falling all over herself, and both the school that she would go to on a day every day. It was like one of these, they teach you how to do like everyday tasks. So in that school, there was all these notes saying she's not doing well. And at the home, there were all these notes saying she's not getting out of bed. She's not doing well. And then the 4th day, they find her passed away in her sleep. So that was the trial, right? No one called the doctors for these 3 days where she's doing horribly. And then what ends up happening is we end up discovering all these notes and all this stuff, and we sued the 2 entities, the home and the day school. They obviously try to blame the doctors, and liability was a dispute, and they essentially got up and told the jurors that they should give them 0. And I think before the trial, our highest offer may have been like $200K. It was an 8-week trial in San Bernardino, and it was just a knockout, drag out. They had 4 or 5 lawyers on the other side, and it was Ashkan and I. Our client, who was Cassara's mother, Carla, was just this amazing, beautiful, beautiful woman. And after, I think it was 8 or 9 weeks, jurors went back and they deliberated for about an hour and a half.
And they came back after an hour and a half. Were you nervous?
I mean,
you're nervous no matter what, but an hour and a half.
Hour and a half. Jurors come back as we're waiting for one of the lawyers. One of the other lawyers says, "Hey, I'll get you guys an offer in the millions. Just let's not take the verdict." And I call Steve, and me, Steve, and Ashkan have a conference, and at the time we had a settlement authority from our client that allowed us to reject that offer. So we said, you know what, we're going to take the verdict, and verdict came back, I think 23.7 million. So,
wow. And so, just for my understanding, what would the cause of action be? So under what cause of action was that? Because it seems that's a complicated case.
Yeah, it was. I forget all the different causes of action. There was like 3 or 4 of them. I forget.
All right, I was just trying to be a nerd. I really don't understand the law. I was just doing that. Somebody told me to ask that question. So
I'll find out. I forget.
No, it's no big deal. I'm just because it's such a that is no simple tort / car wreck or trucking. That makes a trucking case.
It was an extremely complicated case. A lot of experts. And then Ash and I usually we split the cases down the middle. So, I took half the witnesses, he took the other half. We split voir dire, we split closing up. And, part of our thing is, and what we've learned now as the trials have gone on, is really painting the picture of the loss, right? Whether that's human loss, whether that's loss of health, we have, as the trials have gone on, we've gotten very good at that. So
Right, and that's what you're going to be teaching about at TLU Huntington Beach.
yes,
Is making those losses become real. And I know you and Ash are teaching on that, so that's pretty cool.
yeah, you know what it is? It's and it's something I learned being a criminal lawyer. Jurors will only believe things that they can relate to, right? And what I learned a lot, like in sex crimes, for example, and Orange County is a pretty affluent area for the most part, and most people don't think that all this horrible stuff happens. So when you have a 6-year-old or 7-year-old or 8-year-old on the stand talking about all these horrible things that happened to them, if the jurors can't relate to it because they're like, things like that don't happen. A grown man that has a family that has a great career and looks so handsome would never do something with a child. You have to get these jurors to really relate to that, to understand that it's real, right? And it's the same with damages. It really is to get them to relate to something that they may not be able to relate to, right? Because most people haven't gotten in a catastrophic accident or had their loved one die because they had this genetic mutation and they couldn't take a certain pill that a doctor was giving them. And then the homes were acting negligent because they didn't call a doctor, right? Like that's not something every day you wake up and relate to. So getting them to understand and relate to that is what has allowed us to get past the hurdles when it comes to damages.
And so that's what you and Ash are going to be teaching about, really communicating these non-economic damages and these various areas of loss.
Yep. Yeah.
Through different witnesses that maybe normally wouldn't,
I mean,
you think of as the damages witness, even like the liability witnesses.
Oh yeah. I mean, I have so many stories of crossing different liability witnesses, or even like, precipient witnesses, and being able to tap into the loss. We've had times where we've had just random precipient witnesses, and we're able to extract so much good information from them to be able to argue later. And same with in voir dire, right? And we start with meeting the clients at the houses, really understanding from their friends, family. We'll walk from their bed every morning. Where do they walk? Even on a wrongful death, right? Even on a wrongful death, you want to know like what that family member feels when they wake up every morning, right? They walk from their bed and there's a picture of their loved one that passed away sitting on the mantle, right? That's something you'll never know if you don't go to their house and walk in their footsteps and walk in their shoes. And we do that, and we do that from that point through voir dire. Everything's geared for the most part towards damages. Even when liability is at issue, right? I mean, we touch liability, but it's really geared towards damages, and it's just how we present the case and how we leverage the damages.
And so you have to practice in the deposition. You practice in motion hearings. You practice at the grocery store. That's why you have a family. You practice on them. You have to keep the skill up or it erodes. It's simple as that.
Somebody give us an overview of this case.
Or I call wowing it. And what I mean by wisdom of the wise is, why are we still right in spite of this fact?
These are just some of the clips when I was cross-examined 10 years ago, remember that.
About 11 o'clock at night, and he leaves this message. I got a brilliant idea. Every conversation he starts, I have a brilliant idea.
But welcome, everybody. We've got a good crowd here today.
All right. And let's talk about your second civil jury trial. That was What was that case about?
Yeah, second civil jury trial was out in Hanford, California, Kings County. And it was two sisters. One was 79, the other one was 81. And they got in their car, leave their house, and at the first stop sign by their house, a City of Hanford truck runs the stop sign and smashes into them. The one of them was in a coma for about 30 days. The other one was not in a coma, but had significant injuries. Both recovered, and, they didn't get any surgeries after. There was no lean treatment or anything like that. They just had their hospital stuff. And then they were, once that was done, they were, no longer treating. Medical bills were about 300 on one and 100 on the other. And we stipulated to the meds. And we even stipulated to like 200K in meds for each. And there was no futures. We didn't ask for any future economics. And we just argued what it meant for how these two women's lives changed in their 80s and their golden years after this accident. And the defense got up and they asked for $2 million, $1 million for each of them, given their age and the fact that they have no other future medicals that's needed. And we stipulated to that. And we asked, I think, for 20, and the jurors came back with 17.4 million.
That's pretty. Was it stipulated? Was it admitted liability?
Admitted liability.
Wow, it's even more impressive because it's hard to get those big numbers unless you can find a lot of friction in there,
Yeah, admitted liability. But, again, it was, in every trial, Dan, I've learned you need a few things, right? You need an amazing client, which in all my cases, in me and Ashkelon's cases, we've had. You need a real good theory of damages, and you need a little bit of magic in the courtroom. And we've had all three of those, in every trial, there's magical moments that happen that you never think of, whether it's on cross, whether it's, a witness that gets everyone crying, whether it's something, right? You have that magic, you have a great client, and then you frame the case correctly, and that's it.
Well, it's a little bit more than that, but that's good, humility. And then your most recent verdict, which, I'm actually familiar with because you worked on that case while you were at my condo, which is right behind me, my little dojo during my boot camp. I was, I think it came about, I think it was about probably close to a year ago now that you and Ash came out, and then a couple other your guys came out after. Well, actually, you came out with Carlos, and then Ash came out separately with Al. Yeah. So let me ask you about that final, because you just got this verdict about a couple months ago, right?
A couple months ago, yeah. That verdict was a slip and fall in a hospital. Our client was visiting her elderly mother. Our client was in her 60s. It was a disputed liability. What you see on the video is our client walking, then she's on the ground. Nurses say they saw one drop of water that was smaller than a quarter. Our client said there was more water. You saw some wiping on the floor, but you couldn't really tell. The nurses said, I wiped the floor and the napkin was dry, or the paper towel was dry. So they argued that there was, in fact, no water on the floor, or if there was, not enough for our client to slip. Our client goes downstairs to the ER. They don't tell her that she has a fracture in her hip. They say that we told her there was an irregularity, an abnormality. So our client goes on living her life with her hip hurting. She ends up having a dislocated, her hip cracks. So she has a completely displaced fracture of the hip and ends up having to get a couple knee replacements, one on the side that was injured, one later. Top offer, I think, was $150K, maybe, if I remember correctly, maybe 200. They fought liability, they fought damages, made a big deal about lien treatment, made a big deal about, our client getting her treatment in LA, even though she lived in San Bernardino, and all that stuff. We asked, I think, for, I want to say, I don't remember what our ask was, but again, they said nothing, and at most they said, even if you find liability, give them it's like 100 or 200K. Jurors came back with 3.9 million.
Wow. So that's a pretty good run there with Ash. Good thing you got Ash, holding you up there, building up your cases. So you can basically, it's like you get up to bat, you got no outs, bases loaded, and 3 balls. You're like, that's my kind of batting. That's what I like.
Ash and I work well together. He does a good job building the cases up. I think we come from very different places when we do our trials. So we come with different outlooks, and our personalities are very different to the jury, but also it's very clear that how we work is in unison. So the jurors really see us as one unit. And it just, we've figured out a formula on how to work with each other and how to do these trials. And, I can look at a witness list, and if I know enough about each witness, I can tell you which ones Ash is going to be a killer on, which ones I'm going to do a good job on. Right. And so we know exactly how to divide that up and go.
How would you, you came out and we did our boot camp here. How would the things that you learned about performance and connection, because obviously a pretty seasoned trial lawyer. So how did some of that stuff play into your presentation performance in this last trial?
Yeah, I've done 2 trials now, I think, since doing your boot camp. I think the 17.5 million and the 4 million one were after your boot camp. And, one, like I said, I don't have a case. So I run the day-to-day operations of the firm. So I don't really get that much practice doing depots and stuff. So just in itself, just getting up there and doing something was good for me. But I think more importantly, I saw the benefits both for myself as a seasoned trial lawyer, and then for some of my staff that didn't have as many trials as I did. Because if you're a newer person, it really gave you a framework on where to look, what to do, right? What do you do with your hands? Like, you don't know what to do with your hands when you're standing up there. A lot of those things that as a new lawyer, you'll overthink, it gives you this almost default, which is the right way to do it, but a right way default to go to if you're practicing it. And as a seasoned trial lawyer, it really allowed me to take a step back and really think about my actions, because as you do more trials and you do get more seasoned, it's almost like playing golf, right? You start your bad movements become your bad habits. So it's very difficult to then break those bad habits unless someone's telling you to stop and think about it and slow down and think about your eye movements, your hand movements, your tone, your inflection. Those are things that maybe at the beginning in a very different way I was thinking about, but as I did more and more trials, I stopped thinking about. And, I remember in the last 2 trials since your boot camp, there's been times that I've slowed down so much, or I've used my hands to point at something and knowing where to hold my hands or holding them closer or further. A lot of those little things I would think about, and I talk to you and as you get more comfortable being in a courtroom, as you do more trials, then you can it's even easier to step back and think about those things, right? Because you're not just worried about what's my form of the question or if someone objects. Those things come so second nature that, someone can object to me 100 times. I don't even break a sweat. I don't even care, right? And I don't even have to think twice when I'm listening to someone. I could be reading a depo, taking notes, and I know just how to object. It's just, those things become second nature. So I think even as a seasoned trial attorney, it was even probably more helpful for me because I'm not worried about those things. I can really actually start thinking about my hand movements, my eye contact, stuff like that.
And just on a side note, I forgot to mention that there's 30 Sweet James lawyers come into Trial Lawyers University. So if you're like, hey, I always wanted to hang out with Sweet James lawyers, TLU Huntington Beach is going to be the spot to do it at. And I'm especially excited because your firm is hosting the closing party on Saturday night because, we do theme parties. And, Steve said, Dan, I got so many rock stars at this firm. Can you give me a party that matches it? So I thought about it long and hard. And I was like, okay, Rock of Ages, come as your favorite rock star. and you get to sing live band karaoke as your favorite rock star. So,
I will
you
tell
know,
you, I mean, that, I think Steve, James, and I are all very, very big fans of rock music. We've been to a lot of concerts together over the 5 years. So yeah, it's kind of fitting.
see that I was intuitive, and like, and since you've done, I think when you did my boot camp, I think it was like 4 days. Was it 3 or 4 days? Because it's been evolving. It's
Yeah,
been a constant
I
work in
don't
action.
remember. I think it may have been 4. I can't remember.
Yeah, because like now it's 5 days because like I've got it really tuned in, and people bring their cases, so it's even because when we started out, people didn't bring cases; they just came and learned the skills. But I went to Nick Rowley's Trial by Human, and people were working on their cases, but they really like working on their cases. And obviously, if they do a significant amount of their case, then it's the actual case cost. And so, as long as you don't lose your case, it's a lot
Yeah.
easier to absorb or justify. And
And
so now,
I got to give you a shout out. When I went to your boot camp, you then took a lot of time. And I think there were people with various levels of experience. I think I was one of the more experienced trial lawyers there at your boot camp. And you really took the time afterwards to kind of to talk to me and ask me about how you could tweak things to improve them. And just between, my boot camp and Ash's boot camp, the things you guys did differently. And you've talked to me about some of the tweaks you've made, not just to even the scripts, but the overall program. That's not an easy thing to do. At Sweet James, we try to always tweak things and make things better, make processes better. And it really has been the recipe for our success. And I know you've done that. And it's hard to do, right? It's hard to do when you're like, okay, you know what? I have a framework. Now let me break it up and change it. It's a very uncomfortable thing to do. So, I do think it's really commendable, Dan. And it's being uncomfortable changing your framework a little bit based on, I'm sure, a lot of people's feedback and your own thoughts and your own what you see as far as, your vision of your program. It's very commendable because it's very easy to be like, hey, you know what? This is kind of my thing. I'm not going to really change it, and we're just going to go with it. So, that's a shout out to you on
I
that.
appreciate that because like now though it's like so much better than it's ever been because we used to do this tanning salon case and I thought that was good for teaching the skills, but now we do a truck, like a motorcycle hitting a truck case.
Yeah.
And so it's much more applicable to obviously the majority of PI lawyers. And there's actually a dash cam from the interior of the truck showing both the truck driver and the crash itself, and then photos from the scene. So it's a lot easier because I think great trial lawyering is about making a past event become real and almost a three-dimensional hologram in the courtroom so the jury can witness it. And, with having this now, it's just such a better case to tell the story for the skills of eye contact, emotional state control, the hand movement, the voice, the creating space or kind of creating the illusions. But in addition to that, I think I've really worked hard at like sequencing because it's really important when you're learning skills, especially skills you're not familiar with and you want to learn them at a high level, to learn those skills in a proper sequencing. And so now we start, the first day with witness prep and direct examination, because you got to learn your client's story before you can tell it. You got to really get a connection with that client before you can really be an advocate for them. And then we move there from, to the cross-examination of the defense medical expert, which I think creates a real solid framework for any expert cross. But in addition to that, teaches the fundamental skills of cross, like slowing down, being intentional with your emotional state, using a flip chart, dropping all the taglines like right, correct, isn't it true? Dropping all the filler words like most people do their whole career, the ands, so's, okays, and those, looping. I mean, some basic skills, but more cross-examining the present tense. And so, to develop those skills. And then from there to move on to the presentation skills of this trucking case, teaching, the performance aspects, the use of visuals. And then from there, we work on transition to that to voir dire, practicing the skills of connection with voir dire. But from there, we move to the people's actual cases, with like helping people with their actual cases, making their own stories come to life. And then we, when I spend time with each student, helping them really perform the story of their case instead of just telling us the story, but actually so that people can witness it. And then we practice direct and cross, within the context of the witnesses in their case. So that way they learn the basics of the framework and the skills by doing the repetitive actions of everybody's doing the same thing. And there's 6 weeks of Zoom meetups. So people they get here with a good idea of what they're going to be doing. and then, get to develop the skills, but then apply those skills to their actual cases. So it really hits home. And then with the various cases, with 8 or 10 students, people see all these different cases from
Right.
car wrecks to slip and falls to premises to med mail to, assault or, civil rights cases. And then, so they get to see how to create these basic narrative patterns and make them turn into these, like almost like, I want it to be like almost a movie that jury's watching. So they're like, you know what
Yeah.
I mean? Like a story trance.
Yeah, and it really, I think it does help too, because, as a trial lawyer, for me at least, and I'm sure other amazing trial lawyers that you interview may disagree, but I'm constantly both going from high to low. So I'm looking at what's my general, theory of the case. And, in law school and in trial ads, you hear that and you think, oh, that's silly. That's so philosophical, but it really isn't. I mean, when Ash and I try cases, when I've tried, whether it's homicide, sex crimes, I've had, 14-week complicated theories of liability cases. The first thing I do is, okay, what's our theory? What's our story at a very, very high level? And then we work our way down. And then from down, you start then working your way back up. This particular witness, how am I going to get my big story out of this witness through questioning? And you work your way back up, and it's this kind of yo-yoing of going up and down from big picture to very, very detailed back to big picture. And if you can do that through, the courses you have, and, and I know through your boot camp, because you're sitting with a bunch of other lawyers and they're going to tell you about, hey, what about this? What about this theory? It forces you to now step back and listen to other people's perspective much more because they don't know the details of your case, right? And I felt that way in your boot camp, because there were a bunch of good lawyers there and they were talking about, and they had their cases, and we kind of talked big picture about their cases. And it was for the first time they got to step back and have someone look at it at a more higher level. But then they're working on the details on the every day of the boot camp. It's a very important skill to be able, fly up and fly down while you're in trial. And before
Yep.
trial, was prepping for it.
No, right before trial, we're getting all prepared.
Yeah.
And so that way, because all these trial programs, and you always hear people talk about authenticity, and it's so important to be authentic. And I could agree more, but I think authenticity is a result of preparation and confidence, so you can relax.
Right.
And,
Authenticity comes when you're comfortable, right? Only when you're comfortable can you be yourself. And, I always tell people, I'm myself in front of the jury. I'm no different than how I am with my friends when I'm with you. This is exactly my personality in front of a jury. There's, I'm not this like very well-spoken trial lawyer with the big presence. I don't have that. I am who I am, right? But that doesn't mean I cannot be more polished by still being who I am. And I think that's something that I learned from your boot camp too, is, it's okay to be more polished, but still be comfortable with yourself. And that's a fine line to walk, right?
No, and it's like, but nobody, I don't think anybody's their authentic self when they start out, because there's so much going on and you're so insecure. And
you're just trying to get to a verdict. You don't even know what the verdict is, right? You're just trying to you're trying to not get a, directed verdict against you.
Right. It's like if it was a swimming lesson, you ain't trying to win an Olympic gold medal. You're just trying to make it across the pool.
That really is, and as you do more trials, things slow down, right? It's like playing sports in high school, you're doing your thing. Then when you go to college, things speed up, right? And then as you get better, things slow down again. And then, when they go to the pros, you always hear these, football players saying how much faster things are from college, and only when you become a real pro is when everything slows down. And that's kind of how it is in trials, between trial number 10 and number 20, I was, things were slowing down enough that I was like, okay, I can actually prep for this witness. By 20 to 30, it's like, okay, now I really can figure out what I want to get out of this witness, and as you go on, things get slower and you start not worrying about things like objections. You can just know how to handle them, or laying foundation for a piece of document, right? So many lawyers get so nervous about just, putting something in evidence because they're like, what's the language I have to use? How do I lay the foundation? And, I don't even, it doesn't even cross my mind, but that's just because I've done it so much.
Right. And you just brought up that sports analogy. I forgot. Did you play sports in high school or college?
I did. I played football and ran track in high school. ran track, albeit poorly in college. So
Poorly. You're a college athlete. How do you think being a college athlete has influenced at all your courtroom performance?
honestly, a lot of it is just preparation, right? I'm, probably to a fault superstitious with certain stuff. You know, I have to get my routines in. I eat the same thing at lunch every day. I don't wear a watch. Like, shine my shoes every morning at 5 a.m. when I'm in trial, even if it's a 8-week trial. Just, it teaches you to kind of have that laser focus and put a little bit of blinders on, right? And I think for me it's really that. It's just that the spirit of competition and also, I don't know. I mean, maybe because I come from a criminal background, but I always had very, very good relationships with opposing counsel, no matter how much they pissed me off. And it's really learning to, that sportsmanlike conduct. Or sportsmanship. At the end of the day, even though they're being sleazy about it, or even though you think they're just being horrible about it, it's so easy to get mad. It's so easy to wanna say something or snap at them or be disrespectful to them, and, from someone who's, I've had trials where, a lot of trials where someone's life was on the line, right? Or in some of these trials where millions and millions of dollars were on the line. Always taking a step back and conducting yourself in a professional manner, and I think that's kinda lost on us as, we as litigators, you're so used to just going at it all the time and sending nasty emails and nasty meet and confer letters and all that stuff, and then when it translates in trial and it translates to your communications with opposing counsel, it really comes across to the jurors. And it's so easy when they object for you to, get annoyed or show, or object in an annoying way or in an annoyed way, excuse me. And jurors pick up on that. And, I can tell you out of the things that I feel like I do the best is I don't let there's nothing as fired up as I may be, I will never treat defense counsel any differently than I do the judge. I and it throws them off because they expect you to come in hot and, I'll wait to come in hot in rebuttal when I stand behind them and I call them all sorts of names, right? But you know what I always do? I always ask the jurors for permission. I always tell them, hey, it's nothing personal against them, but I want your permission to go after them because of their position in this case. And you know what? The moment you get those things and the jurors know it's not personal and you're getting their permission and for them to understand that, hey, he's about to like go ham on this guy, but you know what? That guy also talked about his kids and I related to him, right? So now you're not pissing off the jurors. So that's what I think being an athlete really taught me is, you can compete and be very fired up and I'm as fierce as they come, but not to do it in a way that throws your game off. You're spending energy hating them instead of how you're going to destroy the next witness. And it's so easy to fall into that. And that's, I think, something that's lost, especially when you're so, you're going against someone who's such a pain in the ass.
That's a nice way to say it. Pain in the ass.
Yeah.
Not freaking asshole, but just a pain in the ass. All right, Bobby, if people want to get a hold of you, how do they get a hold of Bobby Taghavi? And it's not Bobby, it's Sweet Bobby, is it? Bobby at Sweet Bobby.
I have the easiest email. It's bobby@sweetjames.com, BOBBY@sweetjames.com. I love to, I'm a trial nerd and you know that, when I was in your boot camp, I could not wait to talk to everybody about their cases, give my 2 cents, whether right or wrong. But, anytime anyone wants to reach out, we have a lot of resources. We have a lot of great lawyers here. We are very collaborative as a firm. We have a very competition, but healthy competition amongst our lawyers, and everyone helps each other out. And at the same token, if we can help out anyone in the community that has a question, whether it's they're looking for, depots on somebody, or they just want to talk through a case or talk through, in 5 years, I've also learned to be a businessman and how to run a firm. And I've learned from, Steve, who's probably the best in the country. So, I always tell people I've learned PI and gotten an MBA at the same time. So, anyone that wants to reach out, I'm always happy to make some time. And at the end of the day, as a personal injury community, or as we're all in it together, right? And we're all in it to help people. And this is not. There's plenty of cases for everybody, and this is for me. If I can help somebody, that's what I'm here for. So.
I couldn't agree with you more. And if anybody needs to get a hold of me, my name is, my cell is 248-808-3130. And my email is dan@triallawyersuniversity.com. And hopefully we'll see everybody at TLU Huntington Beach. And if anybody's listening to this, if there's any law students that want to come to TLU Huntington Beach, we give, law students full scholarships, because we want to start people learning young and be, exposed to the top trial lawyers in the country. So if anybody's a law student or knows a law student that's interested in learning, have them just shoot me an email or call me or text me, and I will make sure they get a scholarship, because building the future here with all these great lawyers too. And that goes along with anybody else that's listening to this too, that if they want to come and it's really and the reason why they're not coming is money, again, call me and I'll make sure that's not the reason you're not coming to TLU. So
awesome.
It's going to be awesome. So thanks for everything, Bobby. Great spending this time. And actually, you know what? It's one of the things I love about doing these podcasts is get to know people's story behind the story, and not just the person that you knew from going to social events or seeing them in court, but actually, what their whys are behind what's pushing them every day to get out and do the to be in the fight. So,
well, I appreciate it, Dan. Keep up the great work, and we'll see you at TLU Huntington.
You got it.
Ready to train with the Titans and set records with your verdicts? Register for our live conferences and boot camps at triallawyersuniversity.com. Start getting your reps in before the big event by going to tluondemand.com to gain instant access to live lectures, case analysis, and skills training videos from the trial lawyer champions you love and respect, as well as pleadings, transcripts, PowerPoints, and notes for a roadmap to victory. Join the group that continues to get extraordinary results. Trial Lawyers University, produced and powered by LawPods.